Roll call, please.
District 1 Supervisor Alejo. District 2 Supervisor Church.
Present.
District 3 Supervisor Lopez.
Alternate Barba.
District 4 Supervisor Askew.
Alternate Anderson.
District 5 Supervisor Adams.
Here.
City of Carmel by the Sea.
Here.
City of Del Rio.
Here.
City of Gonzales.
Here.
City of Greenfield. City of King City.
Present.
City of Marina. City of Monterey.
Present.
City of Pacific Grove.
Here.
City of Salinas. City of San City.
Here.
City of Seaside.
Here.
City of Soledad. Ambac.
Alternate Paul Hireling.
Caltrans District 5.
Alternate Brandy Ryder.
Monterey Bay Air Resource District.
Alternate Dave Frisbee.
Monterey Regional Airport District.
Here.
Monterey Salinas Transit.
Here.
Yes.
City of Watsonville. CSUMB.
Here.
Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Eloise. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I am. I'll let her know right now.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to public comments. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on any item not on the agenda, but under the purview of TAMC? Seeing none in the board, I'll ask again for those on Zoom. Any member of the public speak on any item not on the agenda under the purview of TAMC? Hearing and seeing none, we'll now move on to item number 3, the consent agenda. I'd just like to let the directors know we received the letter for agenda item 3.4.3 last night. We all have a copy in front of us. Is there any member of the board like to pull any item for discussion? Seeing none.
Consent.
We have a motion from Potter.
Second.
Okay, second from Oglesby. Is there any member of the public who can speak on any item on the consent agenda?
Chair LeBar Javier here is alternate for Supervisor Alejo. I apologize.
Thank you, Javier. I did want to just briefly touch on item 3.4.4, the extension of a contract for safe routes to school education. A lot of our parents, communities know about safe routes to school. It's very important to them. And I've only heard nothing but positive feedback around ecology action. So I'm just glad this program is continuing to move forward. It's very important. Given that, and no public comment, can we get a roll call, please?
District 1 Supervisor Alejo. District 1 Alternate.
Javier here.
Thank you. District 2 Supervisor Church.
Yes.
District 3 Alternate Barba.
Yes.
District 4 Alternate Anderson.
Yes.
District 5 Supervisor Adams.
Aye.
City of Carmel by the Sea.
Aye.
City of Del Rio.
Aye.
City of Gonzales.
Aye.
City of Greenfield. City of King City.
Aye.
City of Marina.
Aye.
City of Monterey.
Aye.
City of Pacific Grove.
Aye.
City of Salinas. City of San City.
Aye.
City of Seaside.
Aye.
City of Soledad.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. I will now move on to item number 4, unmet transit needs, public hearing, and this will be Aaron Hernandez. Aaron?
All right. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Aaron Hernandez, Assistant Transportation Planner with the agency. This morning, I'm going to provide you an overview of the unmet transit needs process and then request that we open the public hearing. The unmet transit needs process is required by the State Transportation Development Act under the local transportation funds, which allocates a quarter-cent of the general sales tax that is collected statewide and comes back to the county on a population basis to support public transit services. Here in Monterey County, we have Monterey Seamless Transit, MST, which provides public transit services to all the cities in our county. Most of this money goes back to MST for transit services, and a small portion goes to the transportation agency for transportation planning, as well as bicycle and pedestrian projects. As a requirement for using these funds, we have 2 public hearings per year to identify any transit needs that are not currently being met. We will have this morning's hearing, and there is another planned hearing to take place virtually and in person at the MST Mobility Advisory Committee meeting on March 29th at 1 p.m. The public comment period for the unmet transit needs process is open until April 30th, and comments can be submitted during the hearings today or at the MST Advisory Committee in writing via email, by phone, or through our agency's website. Once the public comment period closes, staff will gather a list of all the comments received and determine whether MST can meet these needs through schedule adjustments or if they are a longer term need that requires additional grant funding. A running list of past year's unmet transit needs and their status for each is posted on the transportation agency's website. So that concludes my brief presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions from board members before the chair opens the public hearing to accept comments from the public.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions from any board members? All right, seeing none, with that, I will open the public hearing for the unmet transit needs. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none in the room, again, I'll ask for any members on Zoom, public members on Zoom. I see one hand up. Robin, go ahead, please.
Yeah, there's a bike lane planned on Davis Road to help connect Salinas to the greenway around Fort Ord, the bike rec trail going around Fort Ord, the Ford tag. But the path is not a class 4 separate bike path. And the meetings that were held years ago about this very path agreed that it should be a class 4 separate bikeway because it wanted to get families to ride from Salinas over to the peninsula. What's proposed now is just a regular striped bike lane. Class, is that a class 2, I guess, I'm not sure, but this is an opportunity to put in a class 4 separate bikeway so families will ride from the city of Salinas over to the peninsula. I've heard other people talk that say they will no way take their family on a Davis Road, which is now proposed to be 4-lane with just a class 1 or 2, whatever it is, bike lane, and families will not take their kids on that. So I propose that that bike lane be changed to a class 4 bike lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. We'll now move on to Larry.
Good morning, this is Larry Hirahara. I submitted a request in on the website for the unmet transit need. It's a relatively minor one, but I have 2 questions. The first one is Route 46 was supposedly operational again with a stop at Sherwood and Rossi. I think it's 2994. Presently, there's not a bus stop signal there, so I'm curious. I haven't really investigated if it's still operational. And my other request is, in order to have better access to Chinatown, which we have a lot of, hopefully need, that they be the stop be either be reallocated or removed, not removed, but moved over to Tomo, Wongwei, and Rossi, or maybe even an additional one. But that's my request at this time for better access to Chinatown.
Thank you, Larry. Is there any other members of the public who'd like to speak during this public hearing on unmet transit needs? Hearing and seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I'll bring this back to the board. Are there any discussion on this item from any of the board members? Yes.
I have a quick question. So last year, MST had made some changes to the routes. As a result, some routes were affected, some routes were taken away from subsidies, etc. Does this unmet needs consider all those routes which were previously in place to restore them in the future? Is that part of the unmet needs criteria or not?
Could be whether if there's a request on whether some of those services would want to be brought back in terms of because the unmet transit needs criteria, there's like direction of like what's considered an unmet need and then what's not. So depending on what kind of like comments are received on that, we review those comments and then determine whether they would.
Because I sorry to interrupt, but I saw that there was a threshold of 15% in order to establish that there is an unmet need. So is that the underlying assumption that there's 15% of the base that needs to be there before anything can bubble up?
I'll try to check back.
Yeah, that's fine. We can carry it offline. Sure.
Last year, CSUMB was listed under the unmet transit needs list as a resolved unmet transit need, but within this description, it was described as unresolved, which was vague and a little confusing. We will intend, staff at CSUMB is going to attempt to submit on unmet transit needs. However, I'm curious how this might play into the shuttle service that has started at CSUMB to cover areas that MST is not able to serve any longer. And I'm asking this in this county because we've been speaking to a lot of colleagues, a lot of our other sister CSUs as well, who are also beginning to establish shuttle services. This is rather in its infancy, but it's in wide response to the nationwide problem where we are experiencing driver shortages in transit, and other California state universities are trying to make that up. So I'm curious how perhaps in the future unmet transit needs could support these types of efforts, if at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a discussion that CSUMB has had with TAMC in regards of the Better Bus Network system and changing their routes. So there's been discussion of whether LTF funding could support CSUMB's new shuttle service. And then there's also just been discussion like other funding opportunities, but yeah, we'll definitely consider those in the unmet transit needs list and then continue working on case too.
And I would, sorry, thank you, Aaron. I didn't expect an answer right away on that, but I would also just want clarification in the new unmet transit needs list that would occur if we are going to be listed as resolved, but I would rather have it listed as either resolved or unresolved.
That's gotcha. Yeah, I know in the past list with the CSUMB need, it was listed as resolved, but in the condition that that would be continuing work with the paratransit service. So yes, definitely clear that more up.
Thank you.
Okay, and then any other directors? Yes, please.
This is a question that's a bit off topic, but I just wanted to ask, are the shuttles that CSUMB is using electric?
Currently, no. Well, we would like to make them electric. However, California State Universities are in a weird area where we're not a municipality and but we are kind of a jurisdiction. And that bars us from some grant opportunities that are afforded to other cities. I don't know what those are where the discrepancy is just yet. It's our desire to run them as electric, but the CSU lacks funding to purchase them.
Thank you.
Yes, Christina.
Through the chair, we're talking about agenda item 3.4.3, correct?
No,
Not yet?
no, we've already passed that.
Oh, we already passed that. one. Okay.
We're on item 4.
Okay.
Unmet
So,
transit needs, not a
a
problem.
question on that one,
You have a question on that?
on the other one, not on this one.
Okay. Any other board members? All right, so there's no action for this one. Thank you, Aaron. But when you have your discussions with CSU and B2, and also the MST van pool program that's available right now could be another option that's viable. Because the funding on that is spread out. So I encourage you to look into that as well.
Of course.
And MST would of course like to be included in those discussions with CSUMB, because there were some decisions made by CSUMB that has them in the situation they're in today.
I would just like to add to that we want to be fully cooperative with MST as well. And some of those decisions may preclude my time there.
They do.
So, thank you.
That's
Thank
not
you.
about you or me.
All right. There was no action.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll move on to item number 5, is discuss options for meetings in 2023 and adopt a policy that hybrid meetings will follow the traditional Brand-out rules to ensure a quorum. Robert Breyer.
Thank you. Good morning to the board. I apologize for not being there in person. I'm getting over a cold, ironically, and I didn't want to expose you guys. So we presented, or rather I presented in December on the changes to the Brown Act that are wrought by AB 2449. They will become effective, as you already know, at the end of this month when the governor's state of emergency ends. And as you probably gathered from my December presentation, teleconferencing under the new law is extremely complicated, full of lots of traps for the unwary, and very restricted. In fact, there are numerical limitations on how many times people can take advantage of them. They can only do so, board members can only do so with specific justifications, one of which has to be approved by the board. And moreover, there's another really complicated wrinkle that requires a physical in-person quorum to take advantage of the new teleconferencing rules. All of this would be a tremendous strain on staff resources, very confusing. And that's why a lot of folks in my office and really all over the state, from what I've been hearing, are getting to the same place, which is that we've began to believe that teleconferencing, should it continue, it should be under the traditional Brown Act. Just to remind you, that remains an option. The option is without many of the restrictions or problems of AB 2449. The main issue with traditional Brown Act teleconferencing is that the board member is required to open the physical location at which he or she teleconferences to the public and notice that location in the agenda, as well as post the agenda at that location. So during COVID, that was obviously, during the height of COVID, I should say, that was obviously very difficult, if not impossible, which is why the legislature passed AB 361. I'm not sure why they want to go to this new system, but at least under the traditional Brown Act, this avoids those complications, and it does allow some members to teleconference. I have heard that some members wish to set up sort of satellite offices at which they could do this, and that would allow members of the public and people who live in other places like the Peninsula or South County to participate remotely still. Just to be clear, I'm talking about board members. The public is always, well, I believe TAMC will continue to offer the public teleconferencing options. However, that option makes a lot more sense. I've talked it over with a lot of staff, and we brought this to the executive committee last month, asking them for a recommendation to the full board on the policy moving forward. They were in agreement that it made the most sense to not do the AB 2449 teleconferencing. I won't get into all the complications, but suffice it to say, doing them both at the same time can lead to trouble, mainly because of that in-person quorum requirement. That could be a problem if someone wants to teleconference under the traditional Brown Act. They don't count toward the quorum that would allow other members to teleconference under AB 2449, and then members could be pulling in opposite directions. It's just very messy. I know that's a lot. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm sorry it's a bit confusing. I wish I could rewrite the law, but I'm here to answer anything you guys may have. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and I'm sure there's a lot of laws we wish we could rewrite as well. Board members, any comments or questions on this item? May the board members online? Christina.
If I understand it correctly, there was also two excused absences. Is that correct?
It was up to 20% of the annual meetings. For us, it would be roughly two excused.
What happens if they're not excused? What happens and what's the process for non-excused? Do we have a policy for this just yet? What is the state dictating? And is there any other carve-outs that we could override for, say, for example, special circumstances, somebody's ill in the hospital, any of those kind of things that we could?
The limitations are the number of meetings, so 20% or for us would be 2 meetings. After that, we don't show up, but that's why we have alternates.
And what if that happens with the alternates?
Just to clarify, what's being recommended by the executive committee is to follow the traditional Brown Act and not follow AB 2449, which has those 2 options for absence. And part of the reason for that is we do have alternates for all the board members to attend the meetings, but also if we have any board members who decide to notice their location as a meeting location, then having someone call in or video in using AB 2449 would probably throw us out of quorum, because you need one location with a physical quorum. So what the recommendation from the executive committee is to just stick with the traditional Brown Act and either have the meeting attend in person at where the meeting is noticed for everyone, or the option of also noticing an additional location, which requires that it be posted in advance. It would be noticed in our agenda 72 hours in advance, and then it would be open to the public and it'd be accessible, ADA accessible, and other requirements for a meeting location.
So may I follow up with your explanation? So for example, Rios and Mr. Labar, you for some reason can't make it here. You both can have a location in South County and notice it, or is it Mr. Rios has a location at his house and he notices it, and you have a location at your house and you notice it? How does that work?
If we're told in advance and we can include it in the agenda, so it's noticed when we publish the agenda, then that would be fine, as long as they agree to make it available and open to the public. And put the agenda posted at the location in advance.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Oh, no problem. Any other questions or comments? Let me go back to the board of directors on Zoom. Any from you? Seeing none, let me go to, I see Bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Sabo from the airport. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I have a question. Thank you. Am I to understand that the requirements for posting and all the other requirements of this bill are not applicable to non-voting members, like myself as a non-voting member ex officio. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members? Let me go to the public. Is there any members of public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none in the boardroom. Again, I'll ask for Zoom. Any members on Zoom, public members on Zoom like to speak on this item? I see Mr. Sandoval, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You know, it's my understanding that one of the provisions for allowing the other form, the AB, didn't recollect the number, was there was certain provisions like if somebody needed, couldn't find childcare or things like that. Is that correct?
Robert, I'll let you answer those.
There is a limited set of exceptions, including a health emergency, as well as a contagious illness preventing attendance. I'd have to look at the specifics. I don't recall that childcare was one of them, but I'd have to look.
Yeah, I just remember that from, I'm not sure if it was a presentation at the city or another agency where there was a provision for that. If we could find that information, that would be great, just because as we want to make sure that, we recognize that not everyone is able to attend in person, or we want to be more inclusive of people's different situations. Although it may not be a factor at this moment, maybe some other potential elected may have that situation. So that would be something that, that I would consider if that's a provision in there. Otherwise, I'm not very clear on what would be the push for not allowing those exceptions. Is it an additional cost, or what would be the logic behind not doing that?
So do you want me to take this, Todd, or do you want to? I don't want to
hand this off to Todd, Robert.
Okay.
I'll take it, Robert. The reason why the staff is recommending and the executive committee is recommending following the traditional Brown Act requirement is that we could easily lose a quorum if we use the AB 2449 rules, and that would cause significant waste of time for staff and for the committee members who are there to be a part of the quorum, and then find out at the meeting that the quorum is lost. So that's why, as we look at the options, the executive committee recommended staying with the traditional Brown Act.
Okay, I understand. I didn't know there was that fear of the quorum. The quorum is 50% plus one, right?
Quorum is different depending on which committee we're talking about. For example, here at TAMC, it's 9 with a minimum of 7 city representatives.
I see.
So if we were to have more than one location, you would have to have that 9 at one location within the county in order to comply with AB 2449. So in this case, the discussion has been for Supervisor Wendy Brodasky has talked about hosting a remote location for executive committees and rail policy committees, for example, but being in attendance in person here at the board meetings. At the rail policy committee meeting, if we followed AB 2449 and we had 2 different locations, we need that physical quorum at one of those locations. And that makes it very difficult if someone called, if we exercise the remote access options under 2449.
All right. Thank you for that, Todd. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions from any other board members?
Mr. Chair, can I just be heard for just 1 second? I apologize.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify. I did look it up, and Mr. Sandoval was correct. There, a childcare or caregiving need is a justification for the just cause justification under AB 2449. I just wanted to close that loop. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for clarification, Robert, regardless of the allowable justification, the number of times you can use AB 22449 is still limited at a max of 20% of the annual meetings, and for us, which would be 2.
Correct.
Christina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify as well, we are going to continue to be on Zoom and allowing people to take part remotely.
Yes, the public access won't change. This really is bringing us back to pre-COVID rules, and that's why we have the alternates too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any further comments from the public? Hearing and seeing none, I'll bring this back to the board for action.
Move approval.
First with Adams,
I'll second it.
second with Alejandro. Roll call, please.
District 1 Supervisor Alejo.
Aye.
District 2 Supervisor Church.
Aye.
District 3 Alternate Barba.
Aye.
District 4 Alternate Anderson.
Yes.
District 5 Supervisor Adams.
Aye.
City of Carmel by the Sea.
Aye.
City of Del Rey Oaks.
Aye.
City of Gonzales.
Aye.
City of Greenfield. City of King City.
Aye.
City of Marina.
Aye.
City of Monterey.
Aye.
City of Pacific Road.
Aye.
City of Salinas.
Aye.
City of Sand City.
Aye.
City of Seaside.
Aye.
City of Soledad.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Eloise, and thank you, board. We'll now move on to item number 6, which will be a review of laws enacted in 2022 that impact mobility.
Morning, Chair, board members. I'm Doug Bilson. I'm the principal engineer at TAMC. And there were several laws that were passed went into effect this past year, and we thought we'd bring it to your attention and discuss it. So you get two items back to back on laws. So the okay. So the main thrust of these changes were a result of Assembly Bill 1909, which was called it's an Omni Bill, which has been called the Omni Bike Bill, which put several legislation together to pass these laws, and it really changed the way we look at how bikes especially are treated. Previously, bikes were treated as vehicles, so they had to follow the same laws that a driver had to do on the roads, which brought some kind of conflict. It raised the bar for a bicyclist, and a lot of these laws now make it a little bit clearer on and easier to bike. So before, you had to cross the intersections with the cars. Bicyclists were required to register in some cities. They were so you could get pulled over if you didn't have bike registration in some cities. And no motor vehicles were allowed in the bike lane. That is still the law, but what was defined as a motor vehicle was vague. So an electric bike was a very difficult and a challenging issue for a lot of jurisdictions because there wasn't that legal definition. So the new definition of e-bikes is in the California Vehicle Code, and it states pretty simple, but an electric bike is a bicycle. So there was some question about that, and it's an electric bike if it meets the following. It has pedals that are operable. The electrical motor is less than 1 horsepower, and it falls into one of 3 categories. So the 3 categories, so you have what's called a low-speed pedal-assisted electric bike. That is a class 1, and that's a bike that's equipped with a motor that assists only when you're pedaling. So when you're pedaling, the motor can assist you, but it stops assisting at 20 miles per hour, class 1. Class 2 is called the low-speed throttle-assisted electric bike. You don't have to be pedaling to get power assisted on a class 2. And that also kicks off at 20 miles per hour. And then you have a speed pedal assisted electric bike. That's a class 3. And that is, you have to be pedaling for the motor to assist you. And then it stops assisting you at 28 miles per hour. And that's the only one that's required to have a speedometer. Those are the definitions. That's the law. If you meet one of those 3, if you have a bike, an e-bike, that meets that, then you are considered a bicycle. Other motorized vehicles are not considered, some of the things that don't meet this definition are scooters, mopeds, and they must establish or follow the laws established for automobiles. That includes the registration and insurance requirements. Pedicabs can be considered electric bikes, but local authorities are allowed to impose additional equipment requirements on a pedicab. So what this does is, another part, this is another part of the law that went into effect, and it created a margin of safety for passing vehicles. Some of you may be aware that you had to give 3 feet when passing a bicycle, but it's really hard if you don't have a yard stick out there, and enforcement's very difficult, because they're coming in at an angle and they couldn't tell if it was 3 or 3.5 feet. So the new law, drivers must pass the bike and go into a next lane if possible. So it's almost as though you treat the bike as though it were a car. You have to go into a free lane if it's available. Then the last part is the last thing on this Omni bill that clarifies that e-bikes, what local jurisdiction can do to restrict or prohibit the use of e-bikes on bike lanes, bikeways, bike lanes, equestrian trails, and such. Previously, class 3 e-bikes were prohibited uniformly across all bike paths without posting signs. So a jurisdiction could prohibit them, and you wouldn't have to have signs. So if you're driving, you'd have to kind of know an e-bike. It allowed the prohibition of any class of e-bikes on any of the facilities with appropriate signage. The new law, e-bikes are allowed to bike anywhere a bike is allowed unless a local jurisdiction takes action. So I hope that makes sense. Used to be, you had to be where you had to know what the laws were and know them. Now, if it's not posted and you have an e-bike, you can go on any bike facility. A local jurisdiction can prohibit class 3 e-bikes on bikeways, bike paths, and bike lanes. Again, you have to post signs, you have to take action to do that. And any class 1, 2, or 3, all e-bikes can be prohibited on equestrian trails, hiking trails, or recreation trails. Another law that was passed, it has it's for pedestrians, but they have we call them leading pedestrian interval. But what that means is that a pedestrian can get the walk sign in advance of the vehicle. So they get to take over the space of the intersection. You can start crossing, you get a head start, and you can go into the intersection. Usually it's like 5 seconds before the green light comes on for the vehicles. So that's a very good thing for pedestrians, because a lot of times cars making a right turn see that green light, they start taking the right turn and they don't see the pedestrian leaving at the same time. So this allows the pedestrians that was always there. What this now does is it allows bikes that are waiting to take off, they can take off too. Before they couldn't take off with that walk sign. Now they can. It's also the standard for Caltrans to put in these leading indicators. So on Caltrans signals, you'll see a leading ped indicator on all new signals. And usually Caltrans leads the way for most jurisdictions. So you might see that in a lot of the cities, that it'll become the standard in California. It's now legal for pedestrians to start crossing there. So this was, I don't want to get in the back of why the bike licensing ordinance was very selective. And sometimes people are getting pulled over for no other reason than to have their licensing checked, the registration checked. And that was a hindrance to bicyclists. So many bicyclists rode illegally and they weren't even aware of these laws until they would get pulled over. So that a police officer cannot, you can no longer prohibit operation of an unlicensed bike, but you could still have licensing and registration done on a voluntary basis. Here's a big one. So mid-block pedestrian crossing, you know, we all know that as jaywalking. You can now legally jaywalk if it is safe. So police can no longer ticket mid-block jaywalking if there's no cars out there, there's no real reason why you couldn't do it. But they can still ticket you if there was an immediate danger of a crash. So, you know, use it safely, but that is a big difference too in the law. And there it is. So I'm here for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Doug. Very much appreciate the update. So let me come to the board here. Any board members have any questions? Yes, Mary.
I may have misunderstood one part of your presentation, but I thought that it indicated that any cities, that cities may require either licenses or registration. And then I just saw another one that sort of contradicted that.
You can have registration, but you can't require it as a condition of being on the road.
Okay.
So the
and
police can enforce it.
do we know if there are any cities within our county who have that in place or are thinking about putting that in place?
Well, if it is in place, it's no longer enforceable. I don't know of
I
any
see.
cities, but it was being used
So it's
by
the
police
reverse of what I was
selectively
thinking.
in other cities. And so they didn't have to put it into effect. They could just say, hey, you know, police officers, if you see someone that you want to pull over, that's a reason to pull them over. You could say, do you have registration?
Got it.
Now you can't do that.
Yes, Diane.
Back to the first slide on here, I think you had down that the cars can go through an intersection without, I mean, not cars, bicycles can go through an intersection without waiting for cars that to go through, or what was the first slide? I mean, I missed that.
The first, well, there was a slide that when the walk sign comes up.
But before that, I thought I saw something and.
I know what you saw. I saw the same thing. I think it just said you can go in, go with traffic.
Go with traffic,
Yeah, I
is that
think
what it
that's
was?
what it was. It was the very first slide.
Sorry, but
I just wanted to make sure I understood. No, it wasn't that one.
No.
I'm-
Fine.
There's the
I
one with
think
the
it said
the
that an
guy's at a
electric bike can
bicycle,
go
he's at a
anywhere. a bike-
bicycle, he's at a stop sign.
I think that's the one.
Must cross
You must
intersection.
cross intersection with cars. That was
Okay.
that was the original law that you had to cross with cars. So a lot of times you'll have a bike lane and a bike path, and you couldn't go over into and go with when it said pedestrians could walk.
So now a bicycle can go across the intersection. This is the old law, must cross, right?
Correct.
And the new law, could you state the new law for me clearly on that?
The new law is if you're a bicyclist, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear because there's
Yeah,
a lot
no,
of
no, I
laws
just,
here.
yeah.
So you're riding your bike and you're in a bike lane and you see a walk sign, you can go.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was clear on that. The other question I had was about passing. And you stated on here, I believe, that a car passing a bicycle must use the other lane like it's passing a car if it can? Is that what you
If it's
stated?
available. So if you're driving,
If it's available, I just wanted an elaboration on what it meant by that. Okay, so it means if it's available, if it's not available, the car can still pass the bicycle or no?
well, the current law still prevails. If there's a bike and you can't give it 3 feet, you have to go at a safe speed. You have to slow down.
Okay.
And it used to be like, that's about 3 feet. I'm going at 50 miles per hour. Now, or whatever the speed limit is. Now, if there's a lane that was available, you should have gone over in that lane to keep the speed. If you stay in the lane because there's another car there, you have to slow down.
And you have to stay at 3 feet then?
And you have to provide well, if you can't provide the 3 feet, you have to go very slow.
Yeah, just want to get clarification. Thank you.
Gary?
More of a curiosity, was there much discussion about the electric scooters and why those weren't included in this omnibike bill? You know, we're definitely seeing those around, particularly in Marina.
I can only speak my experience. When I worked at the city of Monterey, we had a very challenge on the coastal rail trail of what was a motorized vehicle. And I think the scooter, if it's built to be an electric bike, you know, if it's built within there, that there's a lot of latitude on that. So I think a moped, it just doesn't have any pedals that are operable. I think that's the big difference. And they said, you know what, if you don't have pedals that are moving, you don't belong in a bike facility. And that's why scooters are not allowed there. So now they have to go and they're a vehicle now and have to use the road. I don't know about the discussion though, but I'm sure there was some discussion of where to define what is an electric bike.
Yeah.
Thank you. I actually had a similar question. I believe in San Francisco, especially, e-scooters were like the #1 kind of like area of concern. And I'm surprised that this doesn't even address e-scooters. It just takes into account. It's kind of treats them as automobiles. Is that right? But e-scooters are treated as automobiles.
Correct.
But they can still go on road, like the pathways, like where people are walking.
Yes, and maybe combining those two, what you have is engineers, law enforcement, a lot of stakeholders. And what I noticed when I did this review is they did not change the law. And I think that's what the pivot point was. They did not change the law that there's no motorized vehicles are allowed on a bike lane or a bike facility. So they didn't change that. All they did was say, what is an electric bike? So there could be further discussion about that, but it's.
Yeah, and I believe this omnibus bill was really focused on bicycles versus a whole range of other things that are under the umbrella of what's called micromobility. And electric scooter falls under that umbrella. That might be something we could bring back in the future to the board, a discussion of what's happening around the state with under micromobility, because there are actually a lot of different things being done in different communities. So maybe that's something we can put on our list for the future as a future discussion. Okay. Sure, that'll be great. Thank you. Is this already in effect? Right?
These all went into effect January 1st.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? And do we have any board members on Zoom that have any questions or comments?
Chair, I have a hand raised.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to get a source of reference on the question of scooters. So I would refer you to the California traffic manual, the collision traffic manual, that is the Bible of law enforcement and CHP. And in that, these scooters are considered pedestrians if they are involved in a collision. However, CHP has quite a bit of guidelines on that. So if you have some jurisdictions here among our TAMC board meetings, I'd refer you to your local law enforcement agency, because that one is a little bit different and it falls within the pedestrian when there's a collision. So that legislation is not quite caught up with scooters yet, but it's still considered pedestrians. So they're not forced to be on the street. They can be on a sidewalk as a pedestrian.
Thank you, Ed. Any other board members on Zoom have any questions or comments? Any more? What was that?
Yeah.
Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this item? Again, I'll ask, is there any member of the public on Zoom who'd like to speak on this item? All right, thank you. Thank you, Doug. We'll now move on to item number 7, draft overall work program and budget. This will be Joel and Zeller. And mislabeled the subject. It's the draft overall work program budget and integrated funding strategy. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. I'm Mike Zeller, the agency's Director of Programming and Project Delivery. I'll be presenting today with Rita Goyle, Director of Finance and Administration, on the fiscal year 23-24 overall work program, the agency's budget, as well as the integrated funding strategy. So just to give an overview of those three components. So starting with the overall work program, this document is a requirement for the agency to prepare that outlines the different tasks and work elements that we'll be performing over the upcoming fiscal year. It describes the different activities that we'll be working on, as well as outlines deliverables within each of those tasks for different work elements. As I mentioned, it covers the upcoming fiscal year from July 1 to June 30th of next year. And it sets the basis for the annual budget. So it's the items that we'll be working on that filter into the budget that then basically translates the overall work program into the funding plan, into the expenditures. This essentially reflects the board's activities because the board's priorities. This is where we are committing our agency's funds towards the goals that we're trying to achieve. And this reflects the board's directions for the types of activities that we'll be working on. The budget itself, while the overall work program focuses on a single fiscal year, the budget also looks at the upcoming fiscal year, but also includes a 2-year look ahead as well to see kind of where forecasting where revenues and expenditures are expected to be. And then finally, the third component of this is our integrated funding strategy. So we have a number of activities that the agency works on that don't typically fall within the overall work program. Those are generally specific project related activities that we're working on. So things that we have funding for, like the State Transportation Improvement Program and other funding sources that go directly towards projects, but don't necessarily filter through the agency's budget. You'll find those things in the integrated funding strategy. So we included this one to give a more a whole picture of everything that the agency is working on over the given upcoming year. The funding strategy includes a schedule and a funding pathway. It's a 5-year look ahead for the regional priority projects. And as mentioned, it shows funds that are not currently in the budget. So just to highlight a few of the things that are included in each of these in the overall work program, we have activities like our Vision Zero strategy. So over the upcoming fiscal year, we'll be implementing the agency's strategy to look at coming up and developing transportation improvements that help to reduce collisions and make traveling safer for all modes of travel. This also does include a public outreach component to provide motorist safety information, lane closure information, road construction, things to just make traveling around the county safer for everybody. We'll be kicking off our regional transportation plan update. So this is our long-range transportation plan, looks out over a 25, 30-year horizon. We just completed the 2022 update last June, and now we turn around and we start the process over again. We do coordinate these activities with AMBAG, as well as the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission and the San Benito Council of Governments. Each of our 3 counties prepare a regional transportation plan that filters up to the tri-county level metropolitan transportation plan that's prepared by AMDAC. So over the coming fiscal year, we'll be working on updating the goals and policies in the regional transportation plan, starting to update the project list, and working with all local jurisdictions to work on the project list, as well as the costs and revenues that go into the plan. Related to that, we have our Regional Transportation Improvement Program. So this is a 5-year program of projects. This is specifically required for our State Transportation Improvement Program funding that we receive from the state. So every 2 years, we're required to prepare this document that is a 5-year program of funds of how we're going to use our State Transportation Improvement Program funds. This summer, we'll find out what our funding share is going to be. It's typically in the past has been around $14 million for the 5-year period. And then We'll bring that back to the board in typically October as a draft program, and then the final program in December for approval. This document is then required to be submitted to the California Transportation Commission by December 15th, so that we can program our funds in the next State Transportation Improvement Program. Also upcoming, we have some local funding. We have our Regional Surface Transportation Program funding cycle. We do this every 3 years, where we receive essentially Surface Transportation Program block grant funds is what it's called now, but we still, the old name for it was Regional Surface Transportation Program. These are really flexible funds that can be used on a wide variety of transportation projects, bike, pedestrian, transit, local streets and roads and highways. We typically program these funds in both a fair share as well as a competitive pot. So there's a portion that goes to the local jurisdictions as fair share that can be used at the jurisdiction's discretion for whichever projects they would like to spend it on. And then we do a competitive call for projects. So we'll be bringing more information back on this at the March 4 meeting, and then kicking off the call for projects for the competitive pot, and then bringing back a final competitive program this coming August to the board for approval. And then moving into the integrated funding strategy, as I mentioned, this is our 5-year look ahead for projects that aren't, projects that receive funding that the agency works on, but aren't typically included in the budget. First up is the Surf Busway project. So this has $15 million of Measure X funds on it. Agency staff is coordinating with Monterey Salinas Transit on the development of this project that's currently in final design. As you saw in consent today, there is a funding amendment to fully fund the final design component for this project. And so we are continuing to work with MST to deliver this. We have the State Route 156 Castroville Boulevard projects. This also has Measure X funds, as well as $20 million of trade corridor enhancement program. So that's state Senate Bill 1 grant funds on this project. We are coordinating Caltrans as the lead, and we're working with them to deliver this project. It's just finalizing the final design phase, working through the last few hurdles for the coastal development permit, as well as some PG&E relocations that are required. And this is getting ready for its construction allocation coming up this June. So once that happens, the agency will then continue to coordinate with Caltrans as it moves into the construction phase in the upcoming fiscal year. Similarly, on the Scenic State Route 68 project, this also has Measure X funds on it, $50 million in Measure X. Caltrans, again, is the lead, and we're coordinating with them. This project is currently in the environmental phase. So working with them to complete environmental so that we can then get into the final design. And so we'll be coming back with some more public outreach on this as we get closer to releasing that draft environmental document. Again, on the US 101 south of Salinas. So again, another Caltrans project has $30 million of Measure X on it. We're working with Caltrans as they start the environmental phase. There's also a near-term improvements, the US 101 acceleration lane project between Spence and Eckhart that just received $1 million federal earmark. So we're working with Caltrans to deliver that near-term improvement while we're working on the ultimate frontage road solution for this project. And on the Fort Worth Regional Trail and Greenway, we are completing the final design on the first segments, the Canyon Del Rey segment through Del Rey Oaks and Seaside. We'll targeting to get our construction allocation for that this June. And so then construction activities would begin in the upcoming fiscal year. We also did receive 2 additional grants. One was a federal land access program grant for a segment that runs between Imgen Road and the Jerry Smith Trailhead at the Corridor National Monument, as well as an active transportation program grant that connects at the Imgen Road and runs up California Avenue. So creates essentially from Carmel Avenue and Marina, running all the way down to the Corridor National Monument, creates one long bike and pedestrian corridor. So both of those, as I mentioned, we just received grant funding, and we'll be starting our final design activities on those in the next fiscal year. And then finally, we have our Measure X Senior and Disabled program. So this program funds different agencies throughout the county that provide transportation services for senior and disabled. We just completed a call for projects for this, and we'll be bringing back the final call for projects in the March board meeting. I'm sorry, the final grant awards. And with that, if I can pause here and take any questions if you like, or I can turn the presentation over to Rita to talk about the budget.
Any board members, any questions so far? Is there any board? Go ahead, Christina.
Thank you. Maybe Rita will answer this, but I'm really kind of concerned how much the outlook for the governor's budget is going to impact these programs and or public input for, I know that we represent our constituents, but how do we, at what point and how do we have opportunity for public to present any other projects as we're going forward? I know that you're getting a 5-year plan, and some of us are new on this board, so they're coming here with no point of reference, and perhaps, you know, I don't want to change the game or the, but on a path. So if for the new people that are here, perhaps you can provide some reference of not necessarily how we got here, but how can this plan, how can their input be used? Does that make sense?
It does. So to take the first part of your question about the governor's budget, the main concern that we had with the potential decreases in transportation funding were around the active transportation program. It's our understanding that the near-term program is going to remain fully funded. So the one project, the Florida Regional Trail and Greenway, California Avenue project that was recently funded, we don't think that those funds are in jeopardy. There was essentially a reserve in the state's active transportation program that they program in, and essentially the changes in the governor's budget may remove that reserve of funding that they have, but the projects that are in the program now are still expected to be receive that committed funding. As far as proposing different projects, as I mentioned, we'll be going into our regional transportation plan update. And part of that component is going out to all the jurisdictions to update the project list. So we will have a robust public outreach component with that. And as I mentioned, that's a 25, 30-year look ahead at all of the projects that we're expecting to do through that time frame. So that's the perfect time to reevaluate the projects that are included in that plan. And we go out to all the jurisdictions to take a look at the project list, update costs, and make sure that everything is still consistent with what we're expecting to do.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Bill Sabo, you had a question?
I did. Just a quick one. Thank you for the presentation. And regarding the project delivery that's in the budget, there is that item, US, let's see, Highway 156 Castroville project. There's acquisition of right-of-way. Is that acquisition of right-of-way just for the interchange, or is that acquisition of right-of-way for all of the 156 project?
It's my understanding that acquisition is just for the Castroville Boulevard interchange project. So there's potential for some of the habitat mitigation that's needed. The property that could be acquired may have additional habitat mitigation opportunities that are in excess of what's needed for the project. But the properties that are being acquired are specific to the interchange project. If there are any excess opportunities to mitigate for other projects, we'd potentially be able to bank those mitigations as credits that we could then use towards other projects.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand.
All right.
Being pointed towards the ceiling, Rita.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Good morning, Chair, members of the board, any members of the public that may be on Zoom or in this room, and staff. I'm Rita Goyle. I'm the current Director of Finance and Administration, and I'm going to be elaborating a little bit on what Mike has just talked about, which is the overall work program. And as he mentioned, the overall work program are the activities along with the integrated funding strategy that the agency is planning on doing, not just this upcoming year, but going forward. And the budget then translates some of those activities into dollars and cents so that we can make sure that we have revenues to cover our money, to cover staff time and other expenses. So the entire budget is in your board packet. I believe it's pages 20 to 35. I do have a PowerPoint so we can cover this, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through. And the reason we do this budget at this time in February, it's a draft budget. We do need to send this into our funding partners like Caltrans, and they will review on the comments on the overall work program and anything else. And then they come back with any recommended changes or additions. And we incorporate that into the final budget, which is then presented to the board in May. So this is not the final budget, but this is, probably as close to the final as it'll get in the month of May. Also, the executive committee reviews, we go over some assumptions with them in November. So November of 2022, we reviewed some assumptions with the executive committee. And then they reviewed this draft budget earlier this month, and they recommend approval. So with that said, we'll move forward into, so as I think one of the board members mentioned, there's a lot of new people on this board. So I wanted to just take a few seconds to kind of cover what it is that TAMC does do. We have fiduciary responsibility for the local transportation fund, which I think Aaron talked about earlier, the LTF fund for which MST gets most of the money. We also have a carve out of the local transportation fund, which is 2% for Transportation Development Act, TDA, for bike and pedestrian activities. So 2% of that is carved out for just bike and pedestrians. And then there's a state transit assistance fund that we administer, and all of that goes to MST for mostly their capital expenditures. The regional surface transportation fund, which is about $3 to $5 million that we get for various cities and counties to do activities. And that is done by road miles. So it's a fair share component as well as a competitive. So the competitive part comes back to the board. If some city wants money, we come back to the board and they allocate the funds or not. The Regional Development Impact Fee Agency, which is a joint power agency that was set up about 10 to 12 years ago. And that is funding is based on new development that creates more traffic and congestion. So we can get money from that. And then last but not least, Measure X, which was passed in 2017 by the voters. And we get 3/8 cents of sales tax that the board identified 12 to 14 projects and programs that the money was going to be spent on. Example, one of them being the Safe Routes to School or the senior and disabled programs. So the Measure X money comes in, and then the board, 60% of that goes to the county and the cities. 40% is within the jurisdiction of this board. So that's the Measure X funding. And only money that actually goes through the TAMC financials is in the budget. And the rest, a lot of it is in the integrated funding strategy that Mike talked about. Any questions on that?
Could you please just indicate for people which ones go in the budget and which ones don't from your list?
So some money goes in from the local transportation fund because we have some planning money for that, for the staff time. A little bit goes in from the 2% TDA for any activity that might qualify under the bike and pedestrian. A little bit of money comes from the regional surface transportation fund. Some comes from the regional, so really only the state transit assistance does not go through.
Thank you.
And the other ones, they could be a mixture. They could be some going through the budget and then some going to the integrated funding strategy. So they're not supposed to be exactly totaling up, but they are supposed to complement each other.
Andrew, first.
Yeah, the regional development impact fee.
and I'm new to this board, but how is that calculated, or, as, I know there's a new development impact fee, right, that is paid to cities. Is that the same thing that gets paid to this agency, or? And my reason for asking this question is because it's been brought to my attention, some of this, the formula for that was maybe a little outdated, so those fees don't necessarily cover the improvements needed. So I wanted to find out a little more about that.
So Mike's the expert on that, so
Sure.
Mike, you want to take that one?
Sure. So the regional development impact fees, as you mentioned, it's similar to local development impact fees that the city of Salinas has. So we look at what the potential growth in vehicle trips is going to be in the county over a 30-year time horizon, and do some modeling to see what type of congestion on the roadways that's going to lead to. And then we come up with a program of projects to address that congestion. As you mentioned, the fee program can only collect fees towards the impacts of that new growth. So any existing congestion on the roadways doesn't get addressed. We have to address that through other funding sources. So it's about 25% of the project costs that are attributable to new growth. So when we come up with the program of projects, I believe there's about 10 or 12 projects in there, comes up to a certain dollar amount. About 25% of that total cost is what then goes into the fee program. Then we're able to do some calculations where we come up with what each new trip, its dollar value is for the fees. And then that's how we come up with when a development is proposed to go forward, we figure out how many trips it's going to generate, and then we're able to use the fee per trip to come up with the dollar value for the what would be assessed for the fee.
Okay, so Salinas is going to have a pretty large development come. So at what point will the determination be made about what fee?
If there's a development proposal, we can work with the developers all the time early on to help them come up with an estimate. The time that it actually gets paid, I think generally for most jurisdictions, it's when building permits are pulled. I think the city of Salinas passed a policy that it deferred to a certificate of occupancy. So in your case, the fees would be paid at that point.
Yes. So, also a little new to this board and learning about these. Thank you for the presentation. Who is eligible to receive state transit assistance or regional development impact fee agency funds?
So the state transit assistance is all assigned to Monterey Salinas Transit. As far as a development impact fee, the money is collected in each zone. So depending on the zone, then the money is attributed or applied to development in that zone. Is that correct, Mike?
That's correct. Yeah, towards projects that are within that zone. So as an example, there's some funding that goes towards the surf project. There's also a set aside of funding that goes towards MST transit capital improvements.
Okay.
Let's continue. Okay, moving on. So what are our funding sources? We used to get money from federal funding. We used to get federal highway planning money, but we do not get that anymore currently, unless there's some earmarks coming or something, then we might get some federal money. Todd shaking his head like, no, we're not getting any. Okay, all right, that answers that. So currently we get most of our money through the state. And I apologize for a lot of the acronyms there. I know, call it alphabet soup, but RPA stands for Rural Planning Assistance. PPM is planning, programming, and monitoring money, and it comes to the State Transportation Improvement Program that Mike talked about. Planning grants that are through SB1, State Senate Bill 1. We have the call boxes, which is the SAFE program. FSP, which is the tow trucks, which give assistance on various highways when somebody's stuck on the side of the road. RSTP, which is Regional Surface Transportation Program. And then grants, example, the Salinas Safe Routes to School program. So that's the various funding sources from the state. On the local front, we get money from the Regional Development Impact Fee and also the Transportation Safety Improvement Planning Program, which is Measure X. And then we have our reserves, which is for the call boxes, SAFE. And then rail leases, we have rail leases in primarily in the Monterey Peninsula. And we get rent from various entities that rent a property off the Monterey branch line from us, so we get money from that. And then we have an unassigned. So the thing with reserves, the safe and the rail leases is that the money is granted for a specific project, cannot be transferred to be used on another project. So if we have a funding of a reserve for the safe or the call boxes, for example, we just can't take that money and put it into potholes in the city of Salinas or somewhere else. It has to be designated for motorist aid. So even though we may have a chunk of money there, it just can't be transferred over to another fund. Chair, you wanna, I see a hand raised there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go
I'm
ahead.
just,
I do have a question on that, through the chair.
Oh, yes.
On your rail leases going to the reserves, so who makes the determination where that money is spent? For example, I'm thinking we have a hand cart in Marina that pays lease money on the property. So does that just it goes into your reserve for a specific project? How is it? You just were explaining that, but I just have questions about that. Is it?
so you're asking about the Arena Rec Rail?
No, I'm talking about the rail lease on the reserves, the money that comes in.
Right, but I think you said something about the hand carts.
Yes, for example, they're paying us several $1,000s a month. It goes into this reserves, and then how do we build? I guess the end question is, can
So my
it
understanding,
ever,
there's
can
two
it ever
components.
return to Marina?
There's two components. That one is we are getting some rent money.
Yes.
That does go into the rail leases reserve. We put it into the reserve, we put it into like a savings account. And then as we spend the money, staff spends time on it, because staff is spending time. We pull out of that pool, we spend it on that. The second component, I believe, is, is there another piece of it that we got? We got a $20,000 deposit for that kind of activity. So we got a $20,000 deposit from the city of Marina. So we put that into a pool money and we pull from that as we spend it.
But more generally, the revenue that we collect along the Monterey branch line, at least along the Monterey branch line, which the handcart is one of them. Typically, our vast expenses are the vast majority of our expenses are litter abatement and homeless cleanup of homeless encampments and things along the rail line. So that's our typical, and then landscaping, tree trimming, other things that are part of maintaining the rail line. So that's generally what we spend the money on. As we build up a reserve, we can use it for a specific project along the rail corridor. So that is something that is still undefined. We haven't set aside or designated to a specific project, but we could in the future.
Thank you.
Any other board member, Sloan?
Thank you, Chair. For unassigned reserves, how are those funds determined to be appropriated somewhere?
So we'll talk about that a little bit going forward. Yes, good question. Most of it's at the discretion of this board, basically just stating that. But some of it goes into the operating side, if the board okays that. Some of it is spent on projects and programs.
Okay.
Any other?
So again, as most of you know, the purpose of the budget, it just gives us a road plan, a roadmap. It's our business plan and how we're going to spend money. It reflects board priorities and policies, and it translates the overall work program that Mike talked about into dollars and cents. And we focus on the first year, but we also look ahead to 24, 25 because we don't want to have any surprises. We will come back and revisit the second and third year again next year and the year after, because we do a 3-year each time we present the budget. So again, what makes the agency budget? There's two components. One is the operating budget, which does change slightly from year to year. It consists of staff salaries, benefits, materials and services, rent, insurance, office supplies, anything that we need to run the agency on a day-to-day basis. And then there's a direct program component, which is mostly your capital projects. And it fluctuates depending on the contracts that we give to outside consultants. And it also contains expenses for ongoing programs like our call boxes, tow trucks, and anything with continuous funding that we have on an ongoing basis. And integrated funding strategy identifies projects and programs that are strong candidates for matching funds. So when there is an opportunity to leverage some grant funding from the state or whichever entity that might be giving it, we try to match that with particularly Measure X funding, because that's our most flexible funding that we've got right now. And funding sources include Measure X, Monterey County share of the STIP program, and then the various Senate One bill formulas for programs like the Fort Ord Regional Greenway or Highway 68 or Rail to Salinas. So what are some of the highlights of the budget we're presenting this morning? There's slight increase in the planning revenues. We take some staff support time for any projects that we might work on, like our call boxes, SAVE, rail project, anything like that. We work diligently to control expenditures. And we have sufficient funds for cash flow because we have to front the money. We get money reimbursed in arrears, so we have to spend the money and then ask for our granting partners, funding partners to give us the money afterwards. So we have to make sure that we have enough money in the bank to fund those cash flows. And we do have prudent cash reserves for any operating shortfall that might occur. And we make 3-year projections to keep the board informed so that there's no surprises. And my philosophy has been, I always tend to estimate revenues a little conservatively, expenses a little bit more realistically, or a little bit more on the plus side, just so that we make sure that we don't run short at the end of the fiscal year. So what are some of the revenue assumptions for this year? There's a slight increase in Complete Streets and Safe Routes to School program. There's a Broadway Avenue component for Complete Streets that has some money increased that wasn't there last year. And there is an increase because staff is spending more time on Measure X projects and programs. So there's an increase in revenue from there. Decrease is Safe Routes to School. There's an Every Child grant that is going to be not budgeted for 23-24 because the activity is going to be finished. And there's also the Salinas Valley Safe Routes to School, which will also be wrapped up. So a decrease in funding there. And then we had a big project for wayfinding signs and construction, which was spread out over 22-23 and 21-22. So it will not be the 23-24 budget. And keeping up with the revenue assumptions, we take staff money for call boxes. We take money for the Go 831 program, the motorist aid program, for the tow trucks, for time spent on the Monterey branch line property leases that board member just inquired about, rail extension to Salinas, and then time spent by staff on administering Measure X program and any projects and programs that are associated with Measure X activity. We also have a regional transportation planning assessment that we built to the cities and counties. And on the draft budget, I am forecasting a small use of reserve. I do want to reassure the board that we have unassigned balances of about 8 million, which we can tap into. We don't want to tap into it if we don't have to. But the last 15 years or so that I've been here, we have not actually used any reserves. We have added to the fund at the end of the year. So I want to kind of reassure board that yes, we do have a decent amount of money. We have not had to use it. And I anticipate that we won't have to use it in the 23-24 year. But like I said, I want to forecast it so we have your blessing in case we need it. But we hope we don't have to spend it. And so with that said, our unassigned balance as of June of 21, and I don't have 22 up there because our final audit has not been released for June 30th, 2022, was about 8 million, 8.8. And our call box fund balance was 1.5. So moving on to what are the expenditure assumptions. There is a 4% cost of living allowance that is budgeted. I know there's been a lot of discussion on that. The COLA for the CPI came in around 6.9 for through June of 2022 and about 8% through the end of end of December 2022. Social Security, as you know, gave about 8% last year, 5.9 the year before. Our partner agencies like MBAG gave a 4% last year, and I'm proposing another 4% this year. Santa Cruz Regional Transportation Commission gave a 4.5% last June, giving another 3.5% in April of this year. So in order to be competitive, in order to attract and retain staff, we feel that, and the executive committee did recommend that we can go with the 4%. There was a idea floated. We do get some interest on our unassigned fund balance. So it was proposed that we might consider using that to cover some shortfalls for the unassigned fund balance. We propose continuation of staff stipends, promotions for staff as they come up and are deserving of promotions. Continuation Measure X administration, the projects and program management of Measure X, ongoing public outreach activity, rail extension to Salinas work continues, safe routes to school work continues, and we maintain 6 months of fund balance because, like I said, we have to spend the money up front before we get the money back. So what is the overall budget proposed for in this draft? The operating budget is forecasted at 3.783, which is about a 4% increase over last year. The direct program is forecasted at 2.294, and the total budget is 6 million, a little over that. That's the big picture. So operating revenue, where's that coming from? I indicated earlier that nothing was coming from the federal sources. From the state sources, we're getting about 1.9 million. It's slightly less. It's the various state route to school programs that we talked about earlier that are not in the funding for next year. The local is a little bit more. That's mostly Measure X related projects and programs. And then the reserve is forecasted at 128 to be used. And like I said earlier, though I do not anticipate using that, I think there's some revenue that we can budget from the interest. We can also budget, maybe reduce some funds in the next final draft of May, because we've budgeted money, for example, renting facilities to host the board meetings every month. And we are getting this facility for free, and I'm anticipating we're gonna keep using this. So if that happens, we won't need those kind of funds. Where are the operating expenses? Salary changes, the cost of living adds about change of 80,000. Step and merit increases adds about 36,000. And then we had budgeted for a transition in the finance and HR department for last year. So we reduced that down a little bit because we will not meet all of that in the coming fiscal year. So net salary increases right now forecasted at about $76,000. Benefits, change, health benefits, other miscellaneous benefits, forecasted to be about $25,000. In the retirement unfunded liability is forecasted at $29,000. The net benefits increase is almost $55,000. Equipment replacement, we have not needed to replace cars or anything like that. That's the big component. So there's no change proposed for next year. So what does a 3-year operating budget horizon look like? Last year, the board approved 3.6 million. This year, the draft is 3.7. And then the forecast for the next 2 years is 3.8 and a little bit higher on the 25-26. But we revisit 24-25 and 25-26 again next year. So that's the second component, is the direct programs. Those we will talk mostly about the operating side up till now. Now we're talking about the direct programs. And the state grants are down, but that's mostly the state route, safe routes to school programs that are contributing to that. Local funds are down by about 211,000. There was a regional development impact fee nexus study that we're not going to do this coming year. Regional surface transportation RSTP is down by 148,000. That's related mostly to the wayfinding construction signs program that will be ending this year. And the undesignated reserve you had asked about earlier, that is primarily related to a contract for the rail project, Salinas Rail project that we have given to a company called HDR. So the board blesses it at, at this time, and that's how that is used, and that's coming from the reserve. And the rest are minor changes, as you can see. But that's the direct revenue side for the direct programs. And expenses on the direct programs. The bike and pedestrian activity shows an increase of about 30,000. That's just a shift. There's another work element in another slide. We moved it out of one category and pushed it into this category. So you'll see a $30,000 reduction on the second slide, I believe. The rest of them you can see are fairly similar. The rail leases to Salinas is a little bit higher. I think that is related to acquisition of property for the layover facility in Salinas. Am I correct on that, Christina? Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so that's related to extra money that we'll need for that. Rail to Salinas, that's the contract we just talked about, the 467,000 that's increasing. On-call engineering is increased by 100,000. That's in a new activity that we did not budget for last year. Some of that money is coming from the integrated funding plan from the Measure X, and some of it's coming from the RSTP here. Bike map does not need to be updated. Active transportation sport, that's the 30,000 I had mentioned in an earlier slide, shifted out of here into the slide that was first. Triennial audit, we do that every 3 years, does not need to be done in 23-24. And the rest of the items are still the same. So Caltrans audit repayment, this last one here. I think this is either the last year or one more year that the audit that we paid for 10 years ago that we were dinged for $1 million, and we're still paying that back. Safe routes to school every child, that activity in the safe routes to school Salinas activity done. So that's no money being spent there. Safe routes to school Salinas Valley started this year, continued to next year, but at a slightly reduced effort. And then Alisal greening is the same as it was last year. Wayfinding constructions, no planned activity for next year. And then Broadway Avenue, I think it leaves the city of Seaside. That's a little extra money for coming 23-24. So that makes up the direct program budget expenses. So what are the next steps? You folks review this today, give us approval to send the draft to our funding partners. In May, the executive, we come back with any changes, anything that we don't know today, we come back in May, represent the budget to the executive committee, they review it, and then the board adopts it for final in at the end of May. And what is the recommended action that Mike and I are asking for today is that the board authorize executive director to submit the draft fiscal year budget and overall program to state and funding agencies for review. And board provide any direction and guidance to us on that. And then direct the executive director to bring this board back to this board on May 24th for final adoption. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that may not have been answered along the way.
Thank you, Rita. Board members, any questions?
I don't have a question, just, you are right, the $82,000 for the Caltrans repayment on the audit is up in the following year, but then that's replaced by the $50,000 expenditure for the triennial audit, is that correct?
Yeah, so if the triennial audit is every 3-year cycle, so, but it's a completely different activity, but yes, it will be done every 3 years that it's eligible for.
Any other board members? Is there any members of the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none in the boardroom, is there any on Zoom? No members on Zoom. We'll now bring this back to the board for action.
I'm sorry, I thought we were gonna do comments. I didn't have any questions, but I noticed we don't have an increase on the Safe Routes to School program. And I know that there's, can we go back to that slide?
Let me know when to stop.
Right there. And I know probably some of it was outreach and planning, but for me in Salinas, there's just so many dangers with on some of the identified that TAMC's already identified, right? Just thinking off the top of my head where I live approximately on Main Street, I think we've had like 5 deaths over the last 8 years on one particular intersection. Actually, I'm going to be meeting with a group of parents who has concerns about a crosswalk where a gentleman lost his wife, I think only 1.5 years ago. And so if there's any way that we could squeeze more money into that program, I mean, not just in Salinas, but across our county, I think that saves lives, and it really impacts people's quality of life and just day-to-day safety. So I don't know, like I said, this is only my second meeting, so I don't know at what point the input for that could have been, or what can we do as a board, or how does that work?
Yeah, thank you. What you see here is the planning and support side that TAMC staff does, working with all the jurisdictions to help them get the projects built for that are the safety improvements that you're looking for. So part of this was the Salinas Safe Route to School plan that was completed last year that identified needed improvements around schools. After the plan is done, we help assist your city staff on going after grants to fund those projects. You can also use the local share of Measure X, which is 60% of the total of Measure X, to implement those projects. And often you use that as a match for a state or federal grant. So what you're seeing here as part of our budget is the planning and support side of it. The project funding, if it is coming from TAMC, it will probably not show up in our budget at all because we direct the money directly to the city. Or it would show up in the integrated funding strategy as a specific project and list the fund contributions. Later on this year, we'll have the Regional Surface Transportation Program funding allocations. And that's another example where there's funds that are distributed on a competitive basis and a formula basis to the jurisdictions. And the city might take one of those projects that was identified in the Salinas Safe Route School program and apply for that competitive pot. And then the board will decide how to distribute those funds, and it might get the money that way. So this is really a small part of our overall effort to fund Safe Route to School projects.
Ian?
No, I was gonna move the recommendation, and then I do have a couple comments and a question.
Okay, so we got it first with Ian.
Well, okay, I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment on behalf of CSUMB, if that's all right. Thank you again for the presentation, and we were, I was asking the questions because CSUMB is in a unique position where we are not a municipality, but we are a state-owned land of some kind, with a vested interest in a lot of who we serve, students, we are in need of transportation. But it's my understanding that we are ineligible for the Regional Surface Transportation Program funding to compete in that grant process. And a lot of these programs that you went over, we don't have access to that. At least that's my understanding based on this presentation. Now we're totally in support of these various programs that are and these projects for our region, but CSUMB, I feel, sometimes gets left off because we are this kind of unique. We're a university, but still, I just want to make those comments that there are transportation and transit-oriented projects that our populations and the surrounding populations would benefit from, but we struggle to fund them. And so those are my comments.
Thank you.
I might just comment on that for my.
No, I'll wait for.
Dave, please.
So I think going back, maybe it's a little bit of historic perspective. I don't think that when we originally conceived the university, I don't think we paid transportation impact fees
but we're responsible for certain specific projects that had to be done. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
So I think, not having to pay the impact fees for the development that was out there was a consideration that was given to the development of the university at that time. That was 30 years ago, but.
Yeah.
No, good point. I was gonna say something similar where, the city of Seaside is still struggling to take down some of those buildings out there. But the university gets state funding, right? So, we appreciate that in the city of Seaside. I'm sure Marina would do everything we can to assist, but it's hard to take TAMC money and supplement what the state is not doing for their university, which is again, all of our taxpayer dollars. But I take his comment but what I wanted to ask Todd, though, the executive director, are we having problems getting employees, hiring employees?
We've had, to a degree, yes. It is a very tight labor market for technical staff. And an example being last year, we did a recruitment for planners positions and that we didn't get any acceptable applicants. So we have to be very careful, I think, about making sure that we have a competitive salary range and attractive jobs, make the jobs as attractive as possible.
No, that makes sense. I think we all are, but I just want to hear you say it, so I can have a better understanding.
Yeah, it's a tight labor market and people have a lot of choices of where they work now. And we want to make sure that our salary makes them feel comfortable working here.
Christina?
Yes, I kind of missed the question time, but before I say that, is it, my glasses are bad. Is it Mr. Campy?
Yes.
I just want to say I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much from the city of Marina. My question is, when we were talking about allocations, there was Broadway. It was a Broadway, but is that Broadway in King City or is that Broadway in Seaside?
It's Broadway and Seaside.
Okay, okay. They said that? I'm sorry about that. Secondly, when we were talking about the reserves, is there a policy for what we, a written policy for reserves, like what, that kind of thing?
It's a policy of having a 6-month reserve for operating for expenses so that we have any shortfalls covered, particularly for our cash flow needs. There isn't a direct policy for how we use the remainder of the undesignated reserve. So we've been holding on to it to make sure that any major emergencies come up that we have it available.
I guess my contact, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. As an example, we did have some money programmed here for the rail program out of the reserve. We found that the program is kind of in between potential grant opportunities. And in order to keep the work moving forward, we are recommending programming some of the undesignated reserve towards it. And then when we come into the next opportunity to fund it with state money, we'll bring in the state money. But that's just an example of how we're having that reserve allows us to be flexible and keep the projects moving forward.
So the context of what I'm asking is there a cap? Because if we hold back, $8 million and it grows to $12 million, I don't know if we invest it, reinvest it. So I don't know if it's, subject to the stock market. At what point do we have this big giant pot of money that we are keeping for a rainy day, which I appreciate, but we did have our rainy day. We did have our flood with COVID, and we've had numerous tests to all of our city budgets. But at what point does this become sort of a saving a little too much and not reinvesting it back for the purposes that the taxes such as Measure X were collected for? That's all. I possibly don't need an answer, but perhaps for future time we can talk about that.
I think that is a good future discussion, and I think it's a good question too, because we haven't had a point where we've ever used reserves in a large scale. We have unknowns in the future. Our office lease expires in a few years. We have to move. We have costs associated with that. Obviously, that's not $8 million worth of cost, but there are things like that that we would need to utilize, things like our reserve to cover. But But in the bigger picture, we don't have a policy how to spend down a reserve once we feel like it's in excess of what we need to hold.
Well, when the governor gives us, $100 million, we got to figure out. Just kidding. That's
Well,
not gonna happen.
Yeah, and so I think that's something that we'll bring back to the executive committee for discussion and then future board discussion.
Okay, and one last
Well,
question. I'm sorry. One last question here. Did we ask the question about the call boxes exactly? If there's a specific, you have $1 million set aside, and we know that we have dead zones on
Yes.
Highway 1. Yeah.
That has been discussed. And so those dollars are very specific only for that. Do we have 2 locations that are in the process of coming online?
2 locations where we're installing satellite call boxes that utilize satellite phones to make the connection in Big Sur in 2 dead spots. And then if the Big Sur community wish to have more call boxes, that'd be something for them to discuss because it tends to be very controversial whether we add any down there.
Thank you.
Chair, just one last one. Todd said something about sending that question about the policy and the cap, because we don't have a cap, but a good policy about how much reserve do we carry. And he said, well, we'll send it right to the exec committee. I think it comes to the board first, and then we'll, we have to send it to the exec committee to see if there's a policy need. But I'm uncomfortable with everything going to the exec, and then it comes here with a clear recommendation. Sometimes it's a wider discussion. Just a comment to you and the exec team.
No, I think that's a really good comment. I would imagine in front of the exec would be an overall conversation.
Just a
And
comment.
then we would bring it here for a full conversation. I don't think there'd be a recommendation come out of the exec committee one way or another. Just a recommendation would be for the discussion at the board level.
Thank you so much.
That sound correct?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
wasn't
that's-
trying to.
That's what I was assuming.
No, I
But you're
understand.
right. No, we're not gonna do that to this board. So we do have a first with Oglesby, a second with Potter. Is there any member of the public that could speak on this item? I see none in the boardroom. Is there any on Zoom? None on Zoom. So can we have a roll call, please?
District 1 Supervisor Alejo.
Aye.
District 2 Supervisor Church.
Aye.
District 3 Alternate Barba.
Aye.
District 4 Alternate Anderson.
Yes.
District 5 Supervisor Adams.
Aye.
City of Carmel by the Sea.
Aye.
City of Del Rio.
Aye.
City of Gonzales.
Aye.
City of Greenfield. City of King City.
Aye.
City of Marina.
Aye.
City of Monterey.
Aye.
City of Pacific Grove.
Aye.
City of Salinas.
Aye.
City of Sand City.
Aye.
City of Seaside.
Aye.
City of Soledad.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Eloise. All right, to keep us on track, so we're all out of here on time. We'll now move on to item 8, discuss and provide direction the staff related to possible community funding project nominations for federal appropriations funding. Christina?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christina Watson, Director of Planning. We have found that the opportunity to apply for federal community project funding or community funding project or congressionally directed funding, spending, or earmarks, depends on who you ask, is upon us. So the deadline for Padilla's office was just announced as March 3rd. So it's a really short turnaround time for that office. We're expecting Senator Feinstein's office's deadline to be the end of March, maybe March 31st, we'll see. And then April is expected to be the deadline for submittals to our congressional representatives. We now have 2, Representative Panetta and Representative Lofgren. So we have, as staff, consulted with our experts in DC. Paul Schlesinger of Thorn Run is on the call, so he can be consulted for questions about process and strategy. And we came up with a long list that we then whittled down to a short list that we then whittled down to one project that we want to recommend for your consideration today. Just as a refresher, in 2023, The appropriations bill included a $1 million earmark for our US 101 south of Salinas Auxiliary Lane project that was on your consent agenda today to add into a co-op agreement with Caltrans to do that project. We have the 2024 appropriations funding needs to be federally eligible. It needs to be able to be obligated as in put under contract for construction by 2027, and it needs to be spent by 2031 is the sort of the framework for how we whittle down the project list. I think you can go to the next slide here now, or am I supposed to do that? Sorry. There we go. So the project we're recommending this time around is the Pajaro to Prunedale G12 corridor, which is the project that TAMC and the County of Monterey coordinated on a project corridor study in 2019 is when that was done. And it goes from the city, the county line between Santa Cruz County and Monterey County and the city line with the city of Watsonville along the G12 corridor down Salinas Road. Well, actually it starts at Porter Drive, then Salinas Road, Elkhorn Road, Hall Road, and San Miguel Canyon, finally terminating down in Prunedale at the US 101 corridor. This project was segmented into 6 segments. The one that has the best benefit ratio and is ready to go at the cheapest cost is the top segment, which is in Pajaro, segment number 6. It connects to the city of Watsonville. It goes through the disadvantaged community of Pajaro. It goes right by the future site of the Pajaro Watsonville multimodal station project. And it happens to be the boundary between the congressional representatives' new districts. So it's a perfect location for the project. The cost estimate from the 2019 study was 1.9 million, which we'll have to find out what the current escalated cost estimate is for the whole project. It includes environmental design, right-of-way, and construction, and it is eligible for federal funds. So that's the project we're recommending. The other project that we included in the report that is no longer being recommended is the King City multimodal train station, because according to the city's public works director and city engineer, Octavio Hurtado, it's not eligible for federal funding at this time. We might want to recommend it for future funding if it doesn't get the funding it recently applied. The city recently applied for the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program funding, which is state funding. So if they get all the money they need from the state, then they don't need to federalize the project. So we're not recommending that project at this stage. And I am happy to take any questions, and Paul is online for any strategy or process questions.
Thank you, Christina. Board members?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
I'm just offering my services. I'm going to be in DC coincidentally the 27th through the 29th of March. And I could drop by the congressman's offices and kind of pitch the project if you'd like. Be Sarah on somebody else's dime too, so it's quite affordable.
We'll get Paul to give you a ring.
Any other board members? Any online? Okay, but was there any online right now? Yeah. Okay. Chaps, Christina, and then Andrew.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. A quick question for me. Is this a recurring event? So next year, we're going to be in some kind of a similar deadline. Is that right?
You know, so we didn't have this opportunity for a full decade, and they brought back earmarks was it last year or 2 years ago that they brought it back. And so we might be able to say it could come back. Paul, do you have any intel on that? Is this gonna be
Well, the good news in that regard is that when there was a vote in the Republican conference of the House, when they were setting their rules for the year, there had been an amendment offered by a California member to not do earmarks, and that was defeated by over a 2-to-1 vote. So unless something happens with the process this year that's not good, you know, it seems like earmarks have to stay, regardless of which party is in control.
And so based on that information, my suggestion is these, it looks like we are narrowing this down to one project, but there are several other projects in tow. It would be helpful for the board to have a list of all these projects that may come up in the near future.
So, and if I can answer that one, that was a question that was brought up. The deadline for this is March 3rd. They only announced like 2 weeks ago. So the important thing was to find the project that was the right dollar amount that could be acceptable. If we can absolutely hash out all the different projects, but I will tell you, one of my concerns was if all of our jurisdiction have projects, if we start bringing them in and then trying to vote one in, we may miss the deadline, and it's more important that we secure these dollars for something that's the most eligible. And that's why this is the one that kind of fits that bill we're looking for. But we may, in the future, it might be good like 3 or 4 months before this process starts again. We'll bring the projects forward, but to clarify, you do talk with different jurisdictions. They already kind of know what projects are around. So that's, and mine, I would have loved to see mine, but those federal dollars actually would have been harmful to us. And project locally that for my city that I backed off because I'd rather see us get funding than something for myself. So, sure. I just want to let you know.
Yeah, and I think, we use the reason why this item followed the budget item is because we use the overall work program, the integrated funding strategy as our starting point for all of these different funding opportunities that arise at the state and federal level. We always start with that, say what is the status of those projects, what is the need, and where can we make sure that it's the best possible fit for this very competitive funding source.
Okay.
So it's not like we came up with this out of nowhere.
That number is around the sweet spot like they like to see. So it's interesting. Christina, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you. I think Vice Chair Pedori answered the question because I wondered, since King City dropped out, would there be a replacement to move up and take that slot or another project? But I think you articulated the process behind that.
Yeah. It wasn't so much dropping out, it was identifying the absolute best project. Instead of showing, we would have been screwed if we sent them 10 projects, 10 requests, right? We may not have gotten anyone, but if we send them one, they're definitely more likely to look at that one seriously. And you have to match the dollars with what their priorities are. And as Christina said, this is actually in both of their districts where they can both claim credit. I think we're in a better position. So, all right. Andrew had one first. And then
just wanted to echo what Chaps had said. It would be helpful in the future if we did have kind of a list of projects so we can see that. I know we were under a time crunch, so I recognize that. Just it'll be helpful to have what projects qualify for that. So thank you.
And if we can, if staff, it should have been in your packet, but that integrated funding strategy really is the in total list of all the projects TAMC's board has approved. Because that goes over several years, and you'll see your Salinas projects in there as we all have them. And then Yuri?
I probably missed it, but can you just restate who the lead would be on this project if it was funded? And if, I'm assuming TAMC is coordinating with that jurisdiction to also submit the funding request, the earmark request?
It's the county of Monterey.
The county. So you're talking with Randy and Tom and all of them?
We are, and I have to say, this has been really difficult to try to come up with a project that fits the very narrow constraints of the earmark process. As we said, it's a $1 million to $1.5 million at max is kind of the sweet spot, and we would have done this quite differently if we had more time. But we were focused on projects that were eligible for federal funding, that dollar amount of money would lead to a construction of the project because they want to be the last dollar in on a project. And this segment for the county received a highway safety improvement program with federal grant, but it was short from the total cost. It had components of the project that weren't eligible for that HSIP program. So we thought that it was a good, and the board had already adopted the G12 corridor plan. It was something that the board had seen before. So it had a lot of reasons why we thought it was for this, within this short time period, it was a good focus. But it's still, our coordination with the county has been really thin. I mean, I've just had a few emails back and forth with Randy. And it's because it's only been this last week that we've been trying to nail this down. And we couldn't wait to next month because we've already missed the deadline to submit. Each of the jurisdictions and MST can submit separately for their own priority list. So if you have a project you think is a good candidate, you can submit your own projects. This was just kind of the one TAMC project we were trying to get approval for.
Ian?
I was just gonna say, I think it's laid out well why you guys came about this project. And I think particularly picking the one that the two Congress members share, they can speak with one voice, you know. But is it guaranteed that we get it? That's why I want to share with the wider group is this just the Monterey County's nomination to them. And each Congress member has 3 or 4 different counties themselves. So this is not a guarantee, that's correct?
It's actually a long shot.
Right. So,
And
no,
it's- yeah.
that's my only point is, you know, this is the best shot to give it to them for the long shot that they have to set forward.
Well put. Any other board members?
Just a brief question, just if the project's approved as it is right now, is it pretty much everything's locked in stone? Is there still a little wiggle room on it? Just, you know, modifications, for example?
I actually probably should talk more with Randy about that, but there's generally more wiggle room when it as they go from to the final engineering for the project and go into construction. There's room to make some modifications there. But it's got to do what the grant says it's going to do first. Yeah.
All right, is there any member of the public who can speak on this item? Is there any online?
Board member Alejo has to say.
Oh, Chair Alejo, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to weigh in on behalf of Pajaro. I'm glad that we're finally following up on the study that we did. I think this project is distinguished because we did do that 2019 study, but this would be the first effort to actually try to start carrying out some of the needed improvements along that important corridor. Many who travel between Salinas and Santa Cruz County, that's the main corridor that many of our residents travel through. And I know there's a lot of other segments there that actually also need some serious improvements, but this is a good start. And I like the fact that it is trying to focus first on a disadvantaged community like Pajaro. Second, that it is also part of our vision for that Pajaro train station in the future there. And the fact that this is a small project relative to a lot of other very costly transportation projects within this scope. So I'm glad that we're able to move forward, and I just wanted to express support of it. Thank you.
Would you like to make that as a motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. I'd recommend approving staff's recommendation.
Second.
First with Alejo, second with Church. Let me double check on community.
No. Thank you.
Oh, that was you. Oh, I'm sorry. Sandoval. Any member of the public like to speak on this item? I see none in the boardroom. Is there any online? All right, I'll bring this back for roll call.
District 1, Supervisor Alejo.
Aye.
District 2, Supervisor Church.
Aye.
District 3, Alternate Barba.
Aye.
District 4, Alternate Anderson.
Yes.
Supervisor District 5, Adams.
Aye.
City of Carmel by the Sea.
Aye.
Del Rio.
Aye.
City of Gonzales.
Aye.
City of Greenfield. City of King City.
Aye.
City of Marina.
Aye.
City of Monterey.
Aye.
City of Pacific Grove.
Aye.
City of Salinas.
Aye.
City of Sand City.
Aye.
City of Seaside,
Aye.
City of Soledad.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Eloise. Thank you, board. We'll now move on to item number 9, receive reports from our transportation providers. First up is Caltrans.
Good morning, board members. Chair, this is Brandy Ryder, and I am sitting in today for our district director. And with that, I'd like to announce that we recently selected a district director for Caltrans District 5. Scott Eads will be will be replacing Tim Gubbins in that role. And he has been in transportation planning since August of 2020 as our deputy district director for transportation planning and local assistance. Scott has worked at a variety of different areas within Caltrans, including project management as our corridor manager for the Highway 101 corridor in Santa Barbara County, and recently did a rotation in headquarters as the Senate Bill 1 program manager for statewide activities. So he has a strong history of building internal and external partnerships. He comes to this role with over 30 years of experience, and we're very excited to welcome him in this new role. We had a press release go out, I think, earlier today. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Scott's background, there's some more information about him in there. With that, I'd like to also announce that we have $100 million in Clean California grants. There was a new round of funding that is open to cities, counties, and other government entities. And the submittal timeframe is April 28th for applications. We have a couple of workshops coming up, and Caltrans plans to identify the recipients of those grant funds in September. And then finally, I came to this board a couple of years ago to present on the Prunedale route rescission. And we recently successfully sold 2 vacant lots in total for $940,000. And those dollars will go back to Monterey County's regional significant projects. There were 2 of them, the South Salinas corridor, as well as the Highway 101-156 interchange. So as we sell those properties, those dollars will be available for those projects that were previously approved by the CTC and the board. And with that, I'm available for questions and comments.
Thank you, Brandy, and definitely send Scott our congratulations. Dave, you have a question?
I'd just like to say that there's good news on the sale of those lots. That was not an easy lift a few years ago to get those dollars to remain in the county. I really appreciate that. Also like to thank Tim for his years of service to the 5th District and the county of Monterey as a whole. He's been a great guy to work with. Scott, good luck, my friend.
Anyone else? All right, let's move on to Monterey Peninsula Airport. Bill?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always a pleasure to talk to the board. This is our slow time of the year at the airport, and our passenger counts, though, are remaining pretty solid compared to the industry. So we're doing very well, and enplanements with no cancellations and a very modest amount of delays, which are primarily due to airplanes coming in from other areas where the weather's been bad. The AT&T Gulf passenger counts and the airplanes that was a little disappointing. It was a little bit lower than expectations, I think, for the Pebble Beach AT&T crowd and also for us, but we're hoping for improvement in next year. We've started painting the terminal, and for some of you who are familiar with the fact that we're considering building a new terminal, why we're painting it is to preserve the building, and because we haven't determined what the next use of the building is if in fact we build the new terminal. So it's a preservation step. And the really big news that we had was getting the mainline aircraft from American on 2 flights a day from Dallas to Fort Worth. A mainline airplane is the kind, not the kind of regional carrier that we've been used to for the last 15 years with all the carriers. This is big boy pants on the airline. So this now provides 126 seats, a full blown first class in the airplane, and it's a big airplane, at least for our size, and it has a full first class, and it has a capability that is very interesting. It has an auto land capability for bad weather, and if the weather, let's say going into Dallas Fort Worth, is really bad, instead of diverting or canceling the flight altogether, it can land without even seeing the runway. It's as a former pilot, that's always a surprise when the first thing you see is the runway. And finally, we're awaiting the FAA's decision on the allocation of funds for the terminal. We need that on terminal funding from the FAA to kind of make the terminal project work. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me advertise the airport.
Thank you, Bill. And I'm actually flying out in one of those big planes tomorrow morning, so I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, be sure and give us a feedback on how the flight was.
Absolutely will. Monterey Salinas Transit, Carl?
Question, could I have a quick question?
Oh, yes, sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
thank
sorry
you.
about that.
So Bill, is there any discussion with any of the airlines about returning to late night flights coming back into Monterey from LA or San Francisco?
You mean like a late night
Like arriving
arrival
at 10
from
o'clock
San
at night?
Francisco?
Arriving in Monterey like 10 or 11 p.m. There used to be flights like that, both from United and I think American Airlines as
We
well.
used to have those, and no, there hasn't been any discussions that I'm aware of, but I will raise the question to see. The most logical one would be a late night arrival from San Francisco into Monterey. United has really cut back a lot of their service to and from San Francisco, and we're kind of disappointed in that. But I'll raise the question, and apparently you've had some interest from constituents. Is that correct?
That's correct, including myself.
Including yourself. Well, you're a constituent too. I'll ask the question and give you some feedback.
Thank you so much.
You're
Christina?
welcome.
Yes, through the chair, I have a question about the recent wind event last night and weather relating to the rains. Had there been any what do you call them, diversions or any, I had heard that there was a plane that had some issues in some landing, but had there been any close calls or any impacts because of the weather with our rains and last night's wind event?
No, as far as any kind of close calls, I would become, as a board member, I'd be aware of it right away. But as far as diversions, last night was a little nasty, and I can't really say whether or not that was difficult for any of the arriving aircraft. The wind is certainly a factor, and at some point when the wind gets too strong or it's crossing the runway, they just can't land and have to go somewhere else. And it's not a function of Monterey, it's just the way the wind blows and the way our runways are pointed. So I don't think that there was any diversions last night, but I will again follow up and give an answer back. And I didn't see who asked the question.
Christina Medina Dirksen, Marina Council Vice Chair, right?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, I'll get an answer and give some feedback. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, Carl.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 items, or 4 items. We're about 6 weeks into our implementation of our Better Bus Network. We've seen a pretty significant increase in passenger boardings, as well as with our reduced fares. We've seen a large percentage of our passengers taking advantage of the fare capping for $2 for 2 hours, or daily, weekly, and monthly fare cap. So we reduce those funds. So we're off to a good start there. We have announcing today, we have a public survey that's open will be on our website later today, but is also currently on our social media sites for our transit-oriented development planning study. MST received some federal funds about a year ago to promote ordinances and help the cities along the surf route, including Salinas, Marina, Seaside, Sand City, and Monterey, to assist those cities in developing ordinances and transit demand management policies that will promote higher density home ownership around public transit routes and active transportation. So there is a public survey that's part of that process, has been released today at MST social media sites and later on our websites. Also like to remind everyone that our colleges are back in school, and our students at Hartnell and Monterey Peninsula College are riding for free, as well as the students, faculty, and staff at California State University, Monterey Bay are riding for free under that program. And more recently, our partner in our contactless payment demonstration, Visa, is offering a $1 discount for anyone who pays on the board with their Visa debit, credit card, mobile device. They'll be getting $1 off until such time as I believe they're putting $20,000 for that. So 20,000 passengers will receive what is equivalent of a half price discount on their fare during this time. So that concludes my.
Thank you, Carl. Board members, any questions or comments? All right, we'll now move on to the Monterey Bay Air Resource District. I think it's Phil, you're in for it today, or Paul, I'm sorry.
Lost our rep from the air district.
Okay. So we'll move on to item number 10, any reports from meetings attended by board members and transportation agency expense?
There are not that I'm aware of.
All right. Executive director's report, item 11.
All right, I'll be brief. First off, I would like to ask Jeff to stand up. I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Keiss. Jeff is coming on board and he'll be taking over for Rita as our Director of Finance and Administration. So appreciate Jeff joining us. He's got a long resume of experience in the finance and HR background, most recently with Regional Government Services, RGS, for the past 12 years. And would you like to say anything, Jeff? I know I put you on the spot.
No, it's just a pleasure to be here. I look forward to working with the board. Thank you.
Jeff.
All right, thank you. And the other item I wanted to mention, I'll wait, we'll get Scott Eads back here in person so we can welcome him. But I've worked with Scott for many years now, and I'm really excited that he got selected as our district director. It's good for us and it's a good choice. And then finally, the Coastal Commission approved on February 10th for the State Route 156 Castroville Boulevard Interchange Project. There was required a local coastal plan amendment in advance of the County Board of Supervisors being able to approve the permits for that project. So on the 10th, the Coastal Commission approved that amendment. We sent a TAMC letter of support, and joining us were letters from Senator Laird, Monterey Bay Aquarium, CHISPA, Landwatch, North Monterey County Unified School District, and Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce all sent in letters of support for the project. And that convinced the Coastal Commission staff to move the item to consent, and they approved it on consent with that. So that's very good news. One of the hurdles for the project. And then finally, they're looking to schedule final approval with the Board of Supervisors for the coastal permits, looking at March 23rd. That's not set yet, but hopefully we can get scheduled so that the Board of Supervisors can get that approval done, and just a few more hurdles for that project to get to its funding allocation. So that concludes my report.
All right, we'll move on to item number 12, announcements or comments from board members. This would be a good opportunity.
This would be a good opportunity. Okay, I do have two things. One, taking a look at our calendar for our next meeting, which falls on Ramadan. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody here that we need to accommodate, or two, whether there's any need to maybe put the food in another room so we don't tempt anybody. So that was just a question. And then the other question I had, I came in at 9:09 prior to the item agenda number 3.4.3, having to do with the Measure X money for the surf line. Sorry, I'll speak up. A letter was received from Michael Salerno, a spokesman from Keep Fort Ord Wild. We all received it, but it's not in the agenda packet.
It was because it was received last night.
Right, it was received last night, a little late. And there is some concerns as this project is in my area. I didn't have a chance to look at it, and now I was. And the question that I had for our director was, we just were talking about the 156 interchange and the Coastal Commission as permits are moving forward. Where does this project stand with the Coastal Commission as we're allocating funding for this Measure X money allocated an extra allotment, if I understand that correctly? So I would like to just know where it stands, if we're required, or whether there's been any review with the Coastal Commission or any others. Mr. Salerno's letter brings up some interesting points that I think we should all at least read.
So the project team has been in communication with coastal staff in preparation of submitting a coastal permit application. And I believe the team's actually looking at applying, it seems to be 3 permits really, one with the city of Marina because it has its local coastal plan, one with the city of Sand City because it has a separate local coastal plan. And then there's an area of the project that's in between that's not covered by any local coastal plan. So that would be submitted directly to the Coastal Commission for a permit. So all of those are in process of being drafted and have not yet been submitted. So the city will be receiving or seeing that on a future agenda. It runs through the review process for the local coastal permit required that's within the city of Marina.
May I ask what the timeline is, and then that area that's not covered, is that county or is that LAFCO property?
It's unincorporated county.
And then any further questions, go offline with it.
I appreciate it.
Not a
Thank you.
problem. And anyone have any other comments on that? Any other board member comments? All right, hearing and seeing none. We'll now ask the public. Is there any member of the public like to speak on the closed session items of real estate negotiations pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8? Seeing none in the boardroom. Again, I'll ask any member of the public want to speak on the closed session item. Seeing none on Zoom. Thank you for your attendance. We'll now recess into closed session.